go ahead and call Senate, Fed, and State to order. Monday, January 31st. Thanks, everybody, for being in here on a Monday. First thing on the agenda is bill introduction. Senator Fasco-Doe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My bill number is, of course, 2022 session, RS 2936, and it's an act concerning law enforcement relating to officer-involved deaths and the use of aggressive force, and it just would require investigations and reports. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Are there objections? I see none. It's introduced. Do we have any further bill introductions? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and move on with our normal agenda. We have a hearing on Senate Bill 179, so we'll go ahead and open it. Jason, you want to give us an overview?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 179 is a fairly simple, straightforward bill. It would designate February 15th of each year as Susan B. Anthony Day. Note that such designation could be made by governor proclamation or by adoption of a resolution by the legislature, although those designations would be somewhat temporary. Passage of Senate Bill 179 would place it actually into statute with other official designated days of the calendar year. And so it would go permanently as a designated day in the state of Kansas. This bill would be effective on publication in the Kansas Register, so it would go into effect sooner if enacted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Not seeing any?
Thank you.
Senator Reichman?
Thank you. Is this the shortest bill you've ever seen?
No, I have actually written shorter bills.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Not seeing any, we'll go ahead and call our first proponent, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, committee, and thank you, Chairman, for hearing this bill. I know it seems to be a small bill. We work on big, major issues in this committee as well as seemingly smaller ones, but this is an important one. We've got two proponents that will speak after me from my community who will emphasize that. There's a series of other testimonials that you'll find in the folder. And this holiday won't be a paid holiday. There's no fiscal note per se in terms of anybody getting time off. But it's important to remember that Susan B. Anthony, her image was put on that coin a number of years ago. She's one of the first women to have that, and there was a reason for that. It's for her work in terms of establishing women's right to vote. And it's a maybe not as well-known fact that she also worked on the African American community's right to vote. With that, I think that the timing of this will coincide nicely with Black History Month coming up. If we can quickly and expeditiously vote this out of committee and get it on the Senate floor. It's an important effort. It's great to have a role model, a female role model for all our women students out there. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, do we have questions? Senator Fasco-Doe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Pittman. Would this, the enactment of Senate Bill 179, so it would establish that day automatically during the legislative session, but would it also require, or would you anticipate that there would be activities on that day here at the Capitol? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. You know, we established this by gubernatorial proclamation for one day 2 years ago on the 100th anniversary of the passing of the amendment that gave the women the right to vote. I think that it would actually be a great day to mark these kinds of celebrating our democracy, but this doesn't actually designate any kind of real activity have to happen, but it will prompt students out in our education system to mark that day and remember and reflect upon and be educated on what it takes to have a democracy with everybody's participation.
Other questions or comments? You're off the hook, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to, I'm not sure if it's Mary Ann Brown or Toby Brown, or if you're both. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for allowing me to offer some testimony. I would like to really actually give you some little background history on why Susan B. Anthony is important to Kansas and her 50-year-long campaign for the 19th Amendment. And I thank Senator Pittman also for introducing this bill. Susan B. Anthony was, first of all, a sister of someone you might recognize the name of, Colonel Daniel Reed Anthony. He was a colorful figure in the annals of Kansas history. Colonel Anthony came to Kansas with the first group of settlers in 1854, sent by the Massachusetts Immigrant Aid Society to fight against the extension of slavery into Kansas Territory. In 1861, having just founded the Leavenworth Daily conservative newspaper, Colonel Anthony rode on horseback in a blizzard from Leavenworth to Lawrence with the news to the territorial legislature that had been gathered there that Congress had approved statehood for Kansas just 161 years ago this past Saturday. When a committee of the Kansas Editors and Publishers Association met in December of 1875, founding the Kansas Historical Society, it was D.R. Anthony who was unanimously elected its first president. But Susan B. Anthony created the first women's suffrage movement in the United States, which led that movement for 50 years, as I've indicated to you. We can document numerous instances where Kansas was intimately associated with this movement, and they did play a leading role toward getting this amendment finally. First of all, Miss Anthony was briefly a resident of Leavenworth, speaking out for rights of both freed slaves and women in 1865, and this was the time that President Lincoln was assassinated. Kansas was the first state to grant women the right to vote in school elections, and that was in 1861. Kansas was the first state to hold a referendum on women's suffrage in 1867. Miss Anthony felt that Kansas, because of its early pioneer settlers, they were up to the task of claiming rights for women. At that time, Leavenworth was the largest city in Kansas. National activists also began their campaigns in Leavenworth. Headquarters was in Lawrence because it was more centrally located. The first national proposal for women's suffrage was presented to the U.S. Congress in 1868 by Senator Pomeroy of Kansas. Miss Anthony appeared before every Congress thereafter until her death, asking for the passage of this amendment. In 1879, she delivered a speech on women's suffrage here in Topeka and continued such speeches throughout her years of campaign in numerous small Kansas communities. She successfully led the campaign for women's municipal suffrage in 1887. The bill was signed by then Kansas Governor John Martin on February 15th. Miss Anthony also celebrated her birthday that day in Lawrence. 8 years before the 19th Amendment was passed, Kansas recognized the right of women to vote in 1912, making it the 8th state and the first in the Midwest to pass a full women's suffrage amendment. The nation's first local chapter of the League of Women Voters to help educate and inform women voters was formed in Sedgwick County, Kansas in 1919. And when the 19th Amendment finally passed and became an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, Kansas was the 4th state in the Union to ratify the amendment. With these points, I would like to propose that you continue your deliberation over this bill, and it's long overdue. And on behalf of the Leavenworth County Historical Society, I ask your consideration, and thank you again for your time. Any questions?
Questions for Ms. Brown? Senator Fasco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mary Ann Brown. My middle name is Ann.
Good one, isn't it?
It is, thank you. So, in testimony here, it states that Susan B. Anthony returned to Kansas in the summer of 1894 to campaign for an equal suffrage amendment. And excuse I should know this, but was she from Kansas? And Miss Mary Ann Brown, her face is on the $2 coin or the $1 coin. And so, well, since we all kind of helped answer that question, but was she from Kansas? Thank you.
Susan B. Anthony was born in Adams, Massachusetts, and it was through the connection of her brother that brought her here, I believe. She came to visit him in 1860, in the early 1860s. But she had other brothers here in Kansas. One, it was Scott Anthony, I believe, who was associated with John Brown down in Osawatomie. So the Anthony family was active early on in Kansas history in the fight for a free state. So it's appropriate at Kansas Day to also be considering this.
Other questions or comments? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ann, or Mary, I'm sorry, Mary Ann.
Mary Ann, thank you.
We have several written proponents. I don't see any other proponents that, go ahead and introduce her.
If I may, Mr. Chair, we had one late request to have an oral proponent.
That's fine, go ahead.
Go ahead and state your name.
Hello, my name is Elise Josephine Mahone Murphy, and I happen to live in Leavenworth. This is my daughter.
Elise Murphy. I am a student at Leavenworth High School, as well as the Cadet Command Sergeant Major of the JRTC program at Leavenworth High School, first in the nation.
My husband and I arrived to Fort Leavenworth 19 years ago, 7 months and 2 days. 16 short months after that, he came upon retirement, and that's when we decided to make Leavenworth our home. I learned a lot about Susan Anthony being there. I happen to be the president of Leavenworth County Historical Society, and I'm also on the school board for USD 453. No, she does not always like that. Thank you for allowing me to speak. To speak on the fact of the power of military and their families. It is because of the military that we made Leavenworth our home, very much like Miss Anthony following her brother to Leavenworth because of a military connection. And so I really want to lend onto that. History is a fundamental facet of our lives. It is our guidepost for what we do today and what we do for tomorrow. And we all know, even as we watch things transpire right now, not everyone agrees with everyone else's choices. But sometimes those choices are right, and it's a difficult path, but she knew what was right. And that was for women to have the vote, not just one type of woman, but all women to have the vote. And because of her steadfast commitment to garner that vote for all women, here I am today as an elected official. But not only that, this child here in November will be 18 just after the elections. Doesn't help her this year. And it's allowed her that same opportunity. And my parents taught me about Susan B. Anthony's strength, even with me growing up in the great state of Tennessee. And I want to lend to you my words and then her words. It takes substantial numbers a lot of times to accomplish great things. But a single individual must also be able to defend themselves in order to do great things as well. A person's vote is that one way they can defend themselves. It is that one voice that cannot ever be shut down. And she enabled for all our voices to be heard equally. So I want to say that in ending this, that Susan B. Anthony had a quote, and she said, "I declare to you that woman must not depend on the protection of man, but must be taught to protect herself." And there I take my stand. And here we stand with her saying we appreciate her vote, the fact she worked for us to have the vote, and I do want to beseech with great humility and respect and resolve to plead with you to please designate February 15th the Susan B. Anthony Day, not just for the past, but the present and for our future. Would you like to say anything?
Well, as a student, and an upgrowing woman, I do appreciate everything she did to empower us, and I know how much we learn about her and how much she still inspires us and women today. And so I do believe that we should designate the day to her, to remember her, and for future like me, and for future women, and just everyone in general. Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
Do we have any questions for the proponents? Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I always think if you stand before us, that somebody should ask you at least one question. So state your name again, ma'am. No, your mom.
Elisa Josephine
Elisa.
Mahone Murphy. Yes, ma'am. It's Lisa, like you forgot me. Lisa.
Okay. At first, I thought you said Aletha, and I was going to say my first name is Oletha. So we're really connecting here today. And young lady, I usually put my daughter on the spot too, so that's just what moms do. I totally support the legislation. I too. Without the efforts of Susan B. Anthony, I too would not be here today of that right to vote, as I am elected the first African-American woman ever in our state's history to serve in the Kansas Senate. And even on this committee, I've served on it for a long time, and at one time I was the only woman on this Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee, and now we have 2 other female senators on the committee. So women do great things, but I do want my male colleagues here to protect me too. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
absolutely. But it's our voices that express the need for all others. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? We have several proponents. Do we have any neutrals or opponents? Not seeing any, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on 179. Okay, we'll move on to our next bill. Senate Bill 360, we'll open the hearing. Jason, give us an overview on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 360 would enact the Kansas Assistance, Animals, and Housing Act. This new act would require that a person who is requesting to have an assistance animal reside with them in their home, provide documentation to the property manager, the owner or operator of the housing provider that documents the person's need for such assistance animal. The bill does define assistance animal as any animal that works, provides assistance, or performs tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability, or that provides emotional support that alleviates one or more effects of a person's disability. And so any person with a disability or a disability-related need could request to have an assistance animal reside with them in their property. The documentation must be in writing. It must be provided by someone who is in a support relationship with the person making the request. And this is typically a healthcare or personal care services person who has knowledge of the individual's disability or disability-related needs. And then the documentation obviously must provide some specifics as to the person's need for the assistance animal, although it does not require documentation of any specific diagnosis regarding the person's disability or disability-related needs. The act would provide that the request could be denied or rescinded if it poses an undue financial and administrative burden on the housing provider or fundamentally alters the nature of the operations of the residence and how the housing provider manages the residence. It could also be rescinded if the assistance animal poses a direct threat to the health and safety of others, causes substantial property damage, or is engaged in a pattern of uncontrolled behavior. There must be objective evidence of this in order to rescind a request for those reasons. The housing provider may require the resident to pay damages for property damage, but only to the same extent and the same manner as which they assess repair costs to any other tenant for damages to the property. And the housing provider cannot charge a pet deposit or any related pet fee for the assistance animal if the documentation is provided and the request is granted. The act would also create a new crime of misrepresentation of entitlement to an assistance animal. This is essentially defined as the intentional misrepresentation or making false statements for the purpose of obtaining permission to keep an assistance animal in a person's residence. The penalties would be a misdemeanor. It's an unclassified misdemeanor of $25 to $100 fine for the first offense. Moves up to a Class C misdemeanor for a second offense and a Class A misdemeanor for all third or subsequent offenses. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Jason? Senator Hosher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jason. What is different in this statute versus what's currently out there? Or do we not have a lot of definitions for these different things as far as what's required in terms of documentation? It sounds like the verification that it is a service animal or assistance animal.
I'm not sure that we have anything specific under Kansas law regarding that relationship between the landlord and the tenant and a request to have an assistance animal. Obviously, there are some disability rights under federal law for a person who needs accommodations, and those accommodations would include an assistance animal, but this would address more specifically the documentation to provide to the housing provider and that relationship more under landlord-tenant law, under the state law.
Okay, so I'm guessing probably a lot of these different properties have probably implemented their own, maybe, as far as.
They may have their own policies. This would just provide some uniformity to landlord-tenant law in the state.
Senator Fasco-Doe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you know why the draft or the proponent of this legislation, how come they are saying that there's no pet deposit, but only if there's damages? So others would be charged a pet deposit to that landlord provider, but
I will let the proponents address that themselves. I will just state that there likely is concern in charging a pet deposit for an animal that is seen as a disability accommodation for an individual. However, the bill maintains the housing provider's ability to recoup repair costs for, damages to the property absent reasonable wear and tear, under common landlord-tenant law.
And Mr. Chairman, Jason, so regarding the documentation that's needed, provided to the housing provider, so are you saying that there is no requirement for an actual statement from a physician you're saying they only have to provide documentation from a caregiver?
That's the way I read the bill, that they would not have to provide any specific diagnosis of a disability or disability-related need. They would simply need a written statement from another provider, not necessarily a healthcare provider, but some other provider who has firsthand knowledge of the tenant's disability or disability-related needs.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my question was pretty well a lot like the senator just before me. My question was, why couldn't they have a, deposit, a pet deposit? So many places have that. And then the other question is, you just talked about your care provider. Could you give me some examples of who can be a care provider? Like, I couldn't probably write one for someone else. I mean, or whatever. I'm just not quite clear how you get that signature. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would imagine, for instance, if you have a therapist or a social worker or someone of that profession that the individual is seeing on a regular basis and knows the need for this emotional support animal or a seeing eye dog would be able to document that need sufficiently in writing for the purposes of this act.
My guess is, they deal with a lot of applicants, and there's, they're not going to charge someone that has an official service dog, but there's a lot of people believe is a service dog that maybe they don't want the deposit. I'm just guessing that's we're going to hear more about that. So, Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, are you comfortable with the language? I mean, an assistant animal. I mean, is that any animal? Or is that too broad? I mean, what if it's a horse or a pig or, I mean, any animal? Or is there a screening type in here that I'm not catching? Or does it really matter?
Well, I will direct your attention to the limiting language, allowing the housing provider to deny a request for a specific assistance animal if there's objective evidence that it poses a direct threat to the health or safety of others that cannot be reduced or eliminated by reasonable accommodation. If there's evidence that it could cause substantial physical damage to the property or that it could engage in a pattern of uncontrolled behavior that the owner cannot, control. I think that would eliminate a wide range of various animal species that you could possibly have in a residential, facility.
That answer your question? Or
Yeah.
we're working the bill, we can talk more about that. I think it's probably, if there's no further questions, hear from the proponents, and then go from there. Okay? Jason? Thank you. One thing I would like, Andrew, if you could maybe get us a little background on what some of the other states have done. Mike Thompson, I don't think he's going to be here. He's working in Judiciary Committee. Jason Gill, your first step.
Yeah, and I'm Jason Grill. Here I help the Apartment Association of Kansas City. Senator Mike Thompson has a conflict today and couldn't be here, but fully supports this. He represents the district that the Apartment Association is in. And just to answer a couple of the quick questions, Jason did a really good job explaining, but, and thank you for having us today. The question about should it just be a service dog? It should be an animal assistance, all animals, because that's what the federal code requires. So right now it's just service dogs. So it should be a broader definition. As far as what are some of the other questions you had? Right now, Kansas code only applies to public accommodations. It has no mention of housing. It does not govern reasonable accommodation requests from applicants or renters under the Fair Housing Act. This would get us in line with the U.S. Fair Housing Act, which covers reasonable accommodations in housing. There's a higher threshold. The reason for this bill is there's tons of fraud and abuse, and we'll have proponents who actually are property managers come up and talk today, but people are buying licenses online from states like Florida and other places, and the property manager really has no way to say no to these things. So this essentially would protect actual people who need these animals, and it would punish people that take advantage of the system. So let's say you have 2 dogs already. You get one of these fake IDs from another state. You come in there. There's no way you can police this, and so the person, the property manager, actually has to accept it. There's just no other way to look at it. This Kansas code would actually help people enforce the rules for those who actually need them, and so that's why we believe Kansas needs it. I think 35 other states have something like this. So, and Missouri just implemented it in 2020. So we're hoping to get in line with the Missouri law and also Kansas to have some ability for the property managers and housing providers to protect those people who actually need service animals and discourage fraudulent requests, essentially, from people who take advantage of the system. And so I think that kind of answers most of your questions so far, but I did want to say we do have 3 or 4 people here and also someone from the National Apartment Association from Washington, D.C. who hopefully can maybe shed some more light on some of what the other states are doing and why Kansas really should move forward with regards to getting its code up to par with the Fair Housing Act and protecting those who actually need animal assistance. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And then I also have testimony I didn't know from folks who wrote in after the 10:30 a.m. deadline on Friday that I was told to bring and share with the committee members as well.
Sure, you could hand that to Michael. He'll get it passed out. We'll take a look at it and we'll read the testimony. Is there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Dennis Watts?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Hi, members. Thank you for the time. My name is Dennis Watts. I'm a regional manager with YARCO. I'm also a member of the Apartment Association of Kansas City and also a member of the National Apartment Association. Through my course of real estate management, I've managed several thousand units of multifamily properties in the Kansas area. This Senate Bill 360 provides excellent guidance, documentation, protection, and enforcement of rental housing providers, as well as residents, as well as those with disabilities. What this bill provides is it provides a method of us being able to understand the requirements for someone to bring a pet into a community. Yes, there is deposits, and that's associated with it. But what we're saying is if you have a disability, if you need a support animal, you know, those pet deposits, those pet fees are waived because you have a reason to have this type of an animal. And that's what we want to be able to do. Over the years, there's been several violations of residents trying to bring in pets so that they can have a pet without having to pay the deposit. You know, we come upon times when we inspect units and they have 1 or 2 pets, and the first thing that they do is they go to the internet and go to Florida, Georgia, or Louisiana, and they get this certificate that says, yes, I have a service animal, without any type of relationship that that person that's providing this documentation to of what kind of animal it is or what that person's disability is. And what this bill provides is it provides that closed gap so that folks can't erroneously go out and get these type of documents. And in the course of that, it also provides some protection for the landlord and for the residents that if you do violate this, that there are penalties associated with it as well. So I strongly support this Bill 360 and think that it's the best practice of our housing industry so that we can continue to move forward with this versus being handicapped with, you know, these fraudulent claims or fraudulent residents coming in saying that, hey, now I have a service animal, a companion animal, where there's really no justified need. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes, sir.
Senator Reichman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming. It helped clear up a lot of things. And one of the question, will we have like a sample document that these people can or how does that documentation work? Because you're talking about how they get off the internet like a free pass. So how do they go about the documentation they need? Thank you.
There should be a documentation that's signed by a care provider that would be identified with that resident's name and that pet description, whether it's a dog, a cat, a bird, so that we can be able to follow that. So the name, the documentation, and then what type of animal that it would be associated with.
Okay. Senator Fescodo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on Senator Reichman's question just now, but who would provide that documentation? So would the housing provider have that form to give to that rental
Oh, yes.
person?
We have forms that they can be able to provide to those care providers. And these care providers are going to be someone that has a relationship with that individual and not someone that's just an internet provider that's getting $50 because, they can certify that this person needs an animal. So, yes, there are plenty of examples of the documentation that we're asking residents to provide. We currently have them doing that now for those with disabilities just to be able to substantiate that. So it's really not coming up with a new documentation.
And Mr. Chairman and Mr. Watts, thank you so much for the thorough presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Watts.
Thank you, sir.
Next up, Kim Coates. Everybody be nice to her. She used to be my neighbor. Her son played on my baseball team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Kim Coates. I am a regional property manager for Cushman and Wakefield. We represent about 1,500 units in the Kansas area. I'm also president of the Apartment Association of Kansas City, and we represent over 110,000 units in the Kansas and Missouri market. As my colleagues have mentioned, we're here as a proponent of Senate Bill 360. The bill protects housing providers, obviously, tenants, and those with disabilities. Specifically, as I don't want to repeat what we've already discussed so far, we have seen not only people coming in with fraudulent applications for service animals, but also where we have a policy right now in place that we allow 2 pets per apartment. When a prospective tenant comes into our community and finds out that we only allow 2 pets, and they already have 2 pets, but they have a 3rd or 4th pet, then they leave our community, go back and get a fraudulent service animal documentation from online, as discussed earlier. And they come back and apply, saying that 3rd or 4th animal is a service animal. And unfortunately, we have no way to prevent them from moving into our homes. And then we're left when they move out with those damages with no pet fees or anything to go against that. So again, it is an inconvenience and to our owners and managers of apartment communities. This bill does help to protect those housing providers, but it also makes sure that we reject the additional pets to be consistent with our policies, and then in turn, we are supporting the animal documentation stating they do truly have a need for the service animal. These changes to the Kansas Code would help lessen the negative effects and abuse. Please vote for Senate Bill 360. Any questions?
Do we have any questions?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kim. Mike Long.
Thank you to the committee. My name is Michael Wong. I'm a senior vice president with Curry Real Estate Services, and we manage and both own and manage properties in Kansas and Missouri. I'm also a part of the Apartment Association, and I was a former president of the Kansas City chapter of the Institute of Real Estate Management. And as a housing provider, we are always trying our best to provide excellent service to our residents and to our properties and to our property owners. And this bill will help us clarify the things. As the Fair Housing Act, we run into situations, as been previously mentioned, where potential residents, current residents, they will come to us and they will request, they'll ask about our pet policies. So we will discuss with them what our pet policies are. And sometimes that may be, it's completely different across properties. Some properties have a no pet policy just because of the size that they are. Some properties may allow 2, like Kim's do, and they ask for additional ones. And sometimes there are breed restrictions and things like that because of our insurance requests. So what happens is they find out that they have to pay $500 or they have to pay $20 a month, and then later they come back with this documentation and they say, well, no, now it's an emotional support animal. And for us, when they have documentation, it's hard because if you've ever dealt with fair housing or you have to be a part of anything for whatever reason, there's never a winner in that situation, and it makes it really hard for us to say no to anything. So we err on the side of caution. For example, we've had a property where it was an emotional support dog, and the dog literally peed and pooped on the second floor balcony to the tenant below's detriment day after day after day, and there was ultimately nothing we could do about it until we could finally make a determination that, okay, come on, this isn't really, your documentation wasn't there, it wasn't the proper thing. And we've had requests for snakes, ferrets, things that Dobermans, you know, just things that make it almost impossible, and they go against your policies, but yet you're locked into this having to make that determination or open yourself up to a potential fair housing claim. So we ask your support for this bill. We all agree that having that supportive relationship, whether it's a pastor or a therapist or a mental health provider or a doctor, would clarify and really help all of us housing providers in the state of Kansas to be able to make those better determinations on who needs an emotional support animal and who is trying to use it as an abuse of the system. Any questions?
Questions, comments? Oh, Senator Fascadeau.
Sir, thank you so much. You shared information I had no idea about. But my question to you, so the service animal, are they usually, I would imagine, trained a little better to not do that, what you stated from the second floor going down just so often? I mean.
Thank you for that question, ma'am. Actually, you know, there's I think when you get higher up, there's a definitive statement of what is a service animal versus what is an emotional support animal. Service animals are trained animals that do the things, and somebody who is blind who has a seeing eye dog, there isn't even a need for documentation in a situation like that because everybody can see what is necessary. The real abuse of the system has to do with the emotional support animals these days because there isn't really anything specific other than being an animal that somebody says helps them with their mental or physical well-being.
Mr. Chairman, so I could just say, I need an emotional dog here with me at the Capitol every day because of all the stuff we deal with, and so that wouldn't, I mean, and who could prove it or not?
And in your situation, the difference is, again, it's in public accommodation. This bill would actually bring it tied into the housing because there's a lower threshold with the public accommodation for you to bring in, or for somebody that's going to come in here with their, you know, potentially. But in housing, there's a higher threshold that we have to meet so that we don't discriminate on the basis of fair housing laws.
Other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Martha Smith? Okay, it's written. Are there any further proponents? Not seeing any. There's a bunch of written testimony there. Take a look at that. Do we have any neutrals? Do we have any opponents? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and close the hearing on 360. I do plan to try to work this bill later this week if unless the snow interrupts our schedule, if we get some time. Andrew, if you couldn't give us a little background on what some of the other states have done, and maybe a sample of what the document looks like. I think that might ease a little bit of Senator Reichman, you know, he'll see, at least see it. With that, we'll move on to our next bill. It is Senate Bill 370. Jason, can you give us an overview, and we'll open the hearing on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 370 would enact the Defend the Guard Act. This bill concerns the Kansas National Guard and members of the Guard. Primarily, it would prevent the release of the National Guard or any members of the National Guard into active duty combat unless the United States Congress had made an official declaration of war or had taken official action to explicitly call forth the Kansas National Guard for the purposes of ensuring execution of the laws of the country, to repel an invasion, or to suppress an insurrection, which are the constitutionally enumerated powers for Congress to call forth the state militia. In addition to that restriction on use of the Guard, the bill would also contains a provision where no member of the Kansas National Guard shall be compelled to receive or be disciplined for refusing to receive any COVID-19 vaccination or other medical treatment for the COVID-19 virus. This is notwithstanding any other federal or state law to the contrary. Finally, the bill provides that nothing in this act would limit or prohibit the governor from consenting to the use of the Kansas National Guard or its members as defense support for a civil authority mission within the United States or the territories thereof. This is essentially typically the federal response to disasters such as a hurricane or a storm. The bill does define active duty combat on page 2, an official declaration of war, to be specific as to those instances when the Guard members could be called into active duty combat. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you again, and thank you for bringing this. I kind of can understand some of the concerns people have. I just don't know how well this will hold up in courts. If the President of the United States orders the Guard to go someplace and it's not declared war, I don't know how we could stop it. That's my first thing. And the second thing, is there any other states have anything like this that you know of that says, well, you can't do that. Anyway, thank you.
Okay.
To answer the second part first, I do believe this legislation has been at least proposed in some other states. Andrew and I can double check to see if it's actually been enacted in any other states. The first question you asked really becomes a constitutional interpretation question as to the extent of the president's authority to initiate action by the state militias absent one of those enumerated actions under the Constitution, under Article 1 of the Constitution. The legislation tries to clarify that, but obviously if they were called into active duty combat contrary to this statute, there could potentially be litigation and a court ultimately deciding whether or not the federal Constitution permitted such federal action, which would be supreme and superior to any state law to the contrary because of the sovereignty provision.
Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, if this bill were enacted, would it prevent any federal funding going to the Kansas National Guard?
Not that I'm aware of, but obviously in our research as to other states that may have enacted this bill, we can certainly look into that question.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, would this prevent, like currently we have 200 National Guard troops from Georgia in Ukraine as an advisory role? That's not an active duty, not an active combat area, but it is a pretty hot spot. Would it prevent them from being deployed?
It would prevent them being released into what is defined as active duty combat under the legislation. Now, whether or not that situation currently could be defined as active duty combat, I don't know. If the situation changes to the point where it could be defined as such, then yes, the bill would arguably prevent the deployment of those members of the National Guard into, remaining in that area and engaging in what is defined as active duty combat.
Further questions, comments? Senator Longbine.
Thank you. Jason, could you get us a definition of active duty combat? Because my interpretation of active duty is any time that a National Guard member would be called into active duty, taking them out of their normal routine, which would be training once a month with some additional timing. I believe any time they're deployed, they're considered active duty. So I think that makes a tremendous difference if you could try to get us a true definition of what this bill does.
Well, I can tell you that the bill defines active duty combat as participation in an armed conflict, performance of hazardous service relating to an armed conflict in a foreign state, or the performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. Those are the specific instances of engagement in active duty combat under the bill. Now, whether the National Guard and federal military law has a different definition, we would have to look at that, but that would not be necessarily applicable under this statute and these restrictions as it's specifically defined here.
I suspect there is a different definition from them, so if we could get that definition so we could compare them, might be helpful.
Sure.
Okay, further questions? Not seeing any. We'll move on to Bob Corkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bob Corkins. I represent Frontier Peace Advisors. Our organization is the one that initiated this movement in Kansas this past year. It is in collaboration with a national organization called Defend the Guard, and we'll be hearing from the head of that organization next in the conferees. But I can tell you, just to respond to a couple of questions here first, this is a relatively new movement. The legislation has been introduced in over 30 states so far, has not passed anywhere yet, came close in West Virginia, but ours, if we enacted it, would be the first state to do so. With regard to funding, I'll call your attention to the fiscal note on the bill that was prepared by the Governor's Budget Office with the input from the Adjutant General's Office, and they conclude that there is no fiscal effect to this bill. That's very important because in other states in which this has been introduced, that's been the primary concern. Is there a risk of losing federal funding if this bill's passed and Congress retaliates against us for passing this legislation? And for a variety of reasons, I believe that's an implausible threat. We'll be happy to delve into that in more detail later. But I think it's refreshing that the fiscal note on this acknowledges no fiscal impact because anything would be speculative if it were to happen. And ultimately, Congress holds the purse strings here, and so probably the best people to get feedback from would be our congressional delegation. And we're working on that, in fact. But that just gives you a tip-off on some of the issues. I want to give you just a brief introduction. Obviously, it's a simple bill. I don't need to get into the particular language. It's a real short bill. But the question is why? And why now? And you don't have to look any further than the headlines that are in the paper. The saber rattling in Ukraine, Taiwan. And the big question is, where is the United States going to send our troops next into combat? It's a very heady call, folks. And then the question comes down to one of state autonomy, state self-determination, our Constitution, which, and these are all referenced within the bill itself, that declares our governor to be the commander-in-chief of the militia, period. And it specifically directs the legislature, to regulate the discipline of our Guard troops, which takes into account that COVID issue. But a declaration of war is something we haven't done in a long time in the United States. Last time was 1942. So we've had an 8-year span in which the state Guard units have been integrated a lot more into active combat duties. The House resolution that passed last year, 6011, I believe was the one, gave a long laundry list of all the foreign combat engagements in which the Kansas Guard has played a part in, starting with the Civil War up through some of the more modern Middle East operations. So that's the question. Are we going to have a formal declaration of war as we used to do? 8 times in the last century, we formally declared war. And the success of the following police actions falls far short of those engagements in which the whole support of the country was rallied behind a real war effort. And we saw how successful it is when the United States takes that kind of unified stand, and how sorely it's lacking when we don't. I've hit on the high points here. You really need to hear from the other proponents on the bill. I thank you for your time. I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, what do you think some of the reasons are for it not passing in those other states where you said legislation has been introduced?
Well, I'd say 2 reasons. First of all, it's a relatively new movement. I think it only started a couple of years ago. And so there's that learning curve to get past. The other factor would clearly be the role of adjutant generals in other states who, fearing that this might result in some loss of federal funding for their state guards, are throwing up a lot of caution flags and concern, and that general reaction from the current adjutants probably explains it.
Further questions? Not seeing any, thank you.
Thanks.
We'll move on. Do we have a virtual setup ready to go for Sergeant Dan McKnight?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify here in Kansas. I'm a 13-year veteran of the United States military. I served in the Marine Corps, in the Army, and in the Army National Guard. And I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2005, 2006, and 2007. I sustained combat injuries there, and I came home and was forced to retire because of the injuries. I'm also the chairman of a veterans organization comprised mostly of global war on terror veterans, and we are working all across the country to help enact Defend the Guard legislation. With Defend the Guard, you often hear a lot of emotional statements in support and opposition. You hear statements of patriotism, funding, jobs, national pride, duty, and honor. These are all words that we take very important. But I encourage you to remain focused on the purpose of the bill, which is simply to strengthen the constitutional principles regarding the ability to take our nation, and by extension our National Guard, from a state of peace into a state of war. I think we've heard it before, but Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution is the Militia Clause. And the militia or the National Guard may be called forth into federal service to repel an invasion, put down an insurrection, or enforce the law of the land. And that's the one that we're here to talk about today, enforcing the law of the Union. Since 1942, as we just heard from Mr. Corkins, Congress has willfully given away their duty and responsibility. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution gives Congress and Congress only the ability to take our nation into war. And the result of that abdication has been endless war. The National Guard has become an auxiliary and a reserve component for the military. And this is a proper role for the National Guard if it's done with the right authority. The National Guard can be called into federal service 2 different ways, and I hope this answers the question from the good senator a moment ago. Title 32 is for domestic and civil defense and national emergencies. Some examples of this are the Kansas National Guard that is currently activated to deal with COVID relief, assisting in food banks, district health centers, local hospitals, healthcare facilities, and medical centers, and testing centers all across the state. Or in California, where the National Guard participates in active firefighting, or Texas National Guard when they helped with the Arctic blast last year. Then the other way is Title 10, which is primarily used to call the National Guard to participate in an armed conflict, in war, in humanitarian relief, or training outside of the United States. And part of Title 10 has already been addressed by the Supreme Court. I hope this helps to kind of clear up some of the issues. The Supreme Court, in a case called Perpich versus the Department of Defense, said that the federal government may authorize members of the National Guard to be ordered into federal active duty service for the purposes of training outside of the United States without either the consent of the governor or the affected state or a declaration of national emergency. The Supreme Court specifically did not address combat in the Perpich decision because the Constitution is already very clear on how, when, and where the National Guard or the state militia can be federalized. And a declaration of war satisfies that clause in the Constitution that says the National Guard may be called into federal service to enforce the laws of the Union. Now, it's important to remember the Constitution states that the President and Congress may now call forth the militia for three purposes. We've said them before: to put down an insurrection, repel an invasion, and enforce the law of the Union. And the Montgomery Amendment, it talks about that, and that was the Perpich decision that strengthened it. So when Congress declares war, this is very important to understand. When Congress declares war, it changes the state of our nation and it becomes the law of the Union. And the National Guard can and should be on the tip of the spear. They should be activated into federal service under Title 10 to fight and win and then come home. Without a declaration of war, though, that last part never seems to happen. And if Congress wants the citizens, tradesmen, teachers, firefighters, police officers of Kansas to go and fight our nation's wars, which they are prepared and capable to do in probably the most professional manner, then Congress must first put their name on the line before Kansas National Guardsmen put their boots on the ground. And the Defend the Guard is a way for states, for the people, to reclaim their power from the federal government. We are a federalist nation, and it's important to remember that. In 2001, Congress abdicated their responsibility, and instead of declaring war after the attacks on 9/11, they issued an authorization of use of military force, which is a blank check that gives the executive the ability to take the military anywhere in the world for any length of time, for any dollar amount, with any checks or balances. 85% of Congress that signed that AUMF is no longer there, and it's never been reissued. It's never been revisited by Congress. We are becoming an empire, and that's not how this is supposed to work. We have allowed this runaway federal government and allowed one man or one woman to commit us to war, the executive, the president. And he or she has repeatedly used the National Guard to prop up opium, pedophile cultures, and warlord cultures in faraway lands where we have no discernible security interest. And finally, the men and women of the National Guard have my admiration and respect. They've been repeatedly deployed to the global war on terror in Africa, the Middle East. Now we're seeing the Florida and Georgia National Guards in Ukraine, Taiwan, and they have the best skills, training, equipment, and professionalism among all the United States military. But it was a great 21st century philosopher that said, when you bow down before the gods that you serve, you're always going to get what you deserve. And well, unlike the swamp in Washington, D.C., I personally, and my brothers and sisters in arms that have joined our movement, we do not bow down and recognize the gods of endless war and the gods of war profiteering and the gods of the military industrial complex. My God inspired the founding fathers to create the Constitution, which protects our God-given rights, and the people have granted certain rights and powers to the federal government. And committing American lives and treasure to war is a power that we have granted them, and they have abused that power by abdicating their responsibility. Defend the Guard realigns that power and authority within the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Okay, we'll move on. Okay.
Yes, my name is Al Turwelp. I'm the political director of the Libertarian Party of Kansas, and I'm speaking here this morning on behalf of the state chairman and the executive committee. I'm going to leave some of the details about this bill and the specifics that Mr. McKnight, Mr. Corkins said. I'm going to give you the point of view of the Libertarian Party of Kansas. We believe that this is an issue that Kansans were not aware that we needed to address. Due to the growing military tensions around the world, particularly in the Ukraine, it is clear Kansans needs to make some important decisions. This bill protects the members of the Kansas National Guard, upholds our nation and state's constitutional rules of law, and safeguards Kansas state sovereignty. The Constitution clearly states that all wars must be congressionally passed and declared. It is our right and within our power in Kansas to withhold deployment of the National Guard troops from active combat zones where there has not been a congressional declaration of war. The reasons for our support of SB 370 can be epitomized by the valued and proven advantages of three ideas important to libertarianism, those being process, constitutionality, and humanitarianism. Process, like words and actions, are tremendously important and have great meaning. This applies to the most dangerous and costly government enterprise of all, the decision to switch our nation from a state of peace to a state of war. Yet since World War II, we have had federal executives dictate to us rather than a system where representatives make decisions through a process of discovery. This is not democracy. Congress has not done their sworn duty for decades. The Constitution, among other things, is a process document. We have a broken process. History tells us that presidents, emperors, and kings are often the most invested in war and most prone to it. The lack of process eliminates and disregards the checks and balance designs of the Constitution. It is difficult to reason a just cause and deploy Kansas troops into imminent danger to achieve the righting of wrongs when there is no legal or sufficient competent authority that the Constitution requires. A just war cannot exist with America as the aggressor, and it must also be initiated by the legitimate political authority, that being the U.S. Congress. Libertarians seek a limited and constrained government. The Kansas Constitution states that the governor is the commander-in-chief of our troops, and the Kansas National Guard is an instrument of state power. The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution reserves the power to control and discipline troops to the states and the people. This bill also restrains the power of our state executive by requiring the governor to comply with this act until there is an official congressional declared war. We believe there are no serious threats to funding upon the enactment of this bill. Any threat of reducing Kansas funding in retaliation would be viewed by the populace as extremely unethical, hostile, and bullying. We highly doubt Congress, who doesn't currently vote to declare war, would vote a reduction, nor do we believe our U.S. senators and congressmen would tolerate this action. The Adjutant's General Department has issued a fiscal statement, as Mr. Corkins has mentioned, that states that this would not have any fiscal effect. Lastly, the best way to show our appreciation and respect for our troops is to deploy them through legal congressional process on missions that are fully supported by the legislature. We do not honor them by sending them on missions they should not be on, in foreign lands where they should not be. This bill respects our Kansas Guard, their families, by not sending them into harm's way in error, nor does it in the damaging of them financially through their disruption of their employment and the stressing of their family relationships. Congress will not end the declared wars, so the state of Kansas must do it. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Not seeing any? Senator Fascado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, so can you just elaborate a little bit on the COVID piece in the legislation? Thank you.
Yes, I would say that the Libertarian Party has already made some statements earlier during last fall when there was the special hearing. The Libertarian Party does not support in any way the forcing of vaccinations, and that would apply to the National Guard as well. So this is consistent with our beliefs. Obviously, it will be up to you to make the decision if this is what needs to be done, or if this body wants to make some sort of amendment to that, that would be consistent with what the governor has already passed into law. So, I mean, that's your decision, but obviously the Libertarian Party does not support forced vaccinations.
Other questions? Okay, we'll move on to Sergeant John, is it Hauser? Howard.
Okay, Honorable Chair, members of the committee, my name is John Hauer. I was a sergeant in the military, in the Army. Served 2 deployments to Iraq, 05-06, also 08-09. Got a combat action badge from all that business. Basically, I'm here to tell kind of my personal view of what kind of goes on in one of these armed conflicts. My first deployment, I was a driver for a convoy security team, so got to see, I don't know, different IEDs and small arms fire, all that kind of stuff. I don't know, like viewing the harming of property of the people of Iraq, because, I mean, we did do some of that, like following the rules of engagement, we had to fire at vehicles or kind of ram vehicles with ours. And most of the time they were innocent people minding their own business, but we had to stop vehicles because of the rules of engagement. And I don't know, it feels really wrong, but you have to do it anyway. It creates a lot of mental conflict. Our unit's mission, we were a construction engineer battalion, so we were building bases, and we knew that as soon as we left and handed the base over to the Iraqi army, that they were going to strip down every building we built down to the nails and wood and sell it. And we knew that, and we had to build them anyway. Our impression overall was that people were trying to live their lives. We weren't really helping. So the whole winning the hearts and minds that we got told we were there to do really didn't add up to what we actually saw as far as what we were doing there. It was hard to understand our purpose, what we were being asked to basically put our lives on the line for. A lot of us, including myself, really didn't know. And like Al said, during this time, when you're deployed, we were kids. We were like 18, 19, most of us, and most of those who were married, or several of them, a lot of them, their marriages kind of fell apart because they're kids, they're separated, and it just didn't work out. So it causes a lot of damage to families. So these are some very negative aspects of these armed conflicts. Had a buddy that got killed by an IED over there, for example, his wife, pregnant at the time. Of course, all of us, very sad, very angry, and that's when you kind of get, like, you really want revenge. And so it took a lot of, I guess, willpower to kind of calm that down and, realize that he died, for what we weren't sure, but that we just have to be loyal to our friends, keep our emotions under control. Dealing with that kind of stuff, like seeing your friends die, is another one of the really big negative aspects of these armed conflicts. My second deployment, I was a squad leader by this time. We were doing construction missions. As a squad leader, my only goal, I just wanted to bring my troops back alive. And other than that, I really did not care. So we were at a much bigger base this time. We kind of saw firsthand the massive military spending and waste that was going on. And it wasn't necessarily that, but it was just that we could see all the money being poured into this, and it really wasn't what we wanted. Like, we didn't care if they fed us really fancy food. We still just wanted a real purpose, real defined mission, and we still really couldn't get that because, it kept getting changed. First we were there for WMDs, then we were there for getting rid of Saddam, then we were there for winning hearts and minds, and then we were there just kind of to be there. So it was very stressful, and yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of us. Also during that deployment, I had a girlfriend who was also in the military, deployed to the very same base in a different unit, kind of a cross base, but she ended up committing suicide pretty early on in the deployment, and very common thing and among service members that are deployed, and then also when they return home. It's just a lot to deal with. It's very common. I mean, after that, I also struggled a lot with depression and suicidal thoughts. Because, I mean, we were kids, and it's tough. So my final thoughts on this is that at the end of the day, I got out of the military after about 5 years, 4 months, something like that, and I was fine. I had grown up a lot, actually. I saved up to buy my first house, went to college at K-State, but I was pretty lucky because 2 of my buddies have since died from substance abuse. A lot of others struggle with depression. Once again, a lot of relationships falling apart, a lot of broken homes. And, you know, because when you're a kid and you go through this, you don't ever quite get over it. So final thoughts about that. Military service, it can be very positive, like the physical, discipline, mental toughness. It's a great way to get a head start in life, too. Like, it really helped me out in that way. But these deployments to armed conflicts they're bad for the soldiers and bad for our Kansas soldiers because you're getting deployed, put in harm's way, relationships suffer, and a lot of times, like we felt when we were in Iraq those 2 times, that there's not really a clear purpose or a clear reasoning. So this bill would, if a war is actually declared, I'm pretty sure everyone would be very proud. If you signed up for the military, you are proud to go fight and die for your country. It's just when we're out there doing things that aren't necessarily serving our country or helping the greater good, you know, it's asking a great sacrifice for sometimes questionable causes with these armed conflicts. So, yeah, we're just asking that we only deploy the National Guard for the big things, basically. And I know that nobody here can actually end war. Like, I'd love it if we could, but we can't. But we can end the Kansas National Guard going to these armed conflicts. And they'd still be ready to protect and defend Kansas and our nation. And they're still here, home, not deployed, to help in case of natural disasters and things like that. So I know that no other state has passed this, I heard. So Kansas kind of has a chance to lead the way when it comes to bringing peace and prosperity to our state and our nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Fascadell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Sergeant. Thank you for your service. When you mentioned that you would have preferred a more specific mission or purpose, tell me again exactly what that would have looked like to you.
Well, to me, a lot of us weren't exactly sure why we had to, and we talk about this among ourselves, you know, exactly what our purpose was being in Iraq, because we were told that our purpose was winning hearts and minds of the people. And then every day we were going out and doing, you know, checkpoints. I don't know, basically by all our actions, we were not winning the hearts and minds, and we were doing the exact opposite. We're creating more enemies. Because, you know, every time somebody's cousin or brother, you know, gets killed by our troops, you know, either accidentally or, you know, for in armed conflict, you know, you create a bunch more people that don't like you. And it's like the whole winning the hearts and minds thing, it was just snowballing in reverse. And yeah, we were told that's why we were there. and then it just didn't add up. It was completely the opposite of what was happening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on. We're running low on time, so we got about 10 minutes. Laura Schiffman? I'm probably wrong there, but
Oh, you got it right.
there we go.
So, hello, Chairman, committee members. My name's Lauren Schiffman. I'm a civilian from Lenexa, Kansas. Some of you have seen me quite a bit up here over the last couple of months fighting these vaccine mandates. But I have to say that this is the most important testimony I'll probably ever give because I'm advocating for our troops. I was able to save my job in November because of what you all did, which I'm so grateful for in the special session. But this one is truly critical. If we can't preserve the rights and freedoms of the people that fight for our freedom, then we have absolutely nothing, and America is gone forever. I'm speaking today as a proponent for the bill SB 370 for the rights of the National Guard. If we dive into the fundamentals of what we're really talking about in regards to these vaccine mandates, it's all about freedom. That's the whole reason why these members have signed up, to defend our freedom. These vaccine mandates are a true crisis, a moral atrocity, and really destroying what makes America great. Freedom of bodily autonomy, which is ratified in the Constitution, and then also our freedom of choice. It is established in law that the troops are protected from medical experimentation. You may remember the anthrax vaccine, I don't know, a decade ago. That was not FDA approved, and our troops were experimented on. These mandates are no different. I know we're told that we have a FDA approved vaccine for COVID called Comirnaty, but it's not available in the United States, period. There's no discussion. It is not here. It is therefore against the law to force a non-FDA approved vaccine on our troops. The only vaccine that's available in the United States is under EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. The FDA says that these vaccines, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Comirnaty, are legally distinct. They have different ingredients, although we've never seen the ingredient list of the EUA that's available here in the state of Kansas. So we have no package insert. I don't know if y'all have seen, but they're actually blank when they open up. We have no list of ingredients. So therefore, we have no informed consent. And the reason why I know this is because I actually went to our webpage, the KDHE. This is actually the consent form that everybody who gets a COVID vaccine has to sign. I have it in my testimony so you can look at it. I guess my question is, there's a lot of questions here. Have you had COVID before? Have you had a reaction? Have you had blood disorders? What happens if you answer yes? Because there's no physician that is willing to sign a medical exemption. We've not been able to find one in our state. And then clearly it states, I have been offered a copy of the COVID-19 Emergency Use Authorization. I have read and explained to me and understand the information of the EUA. So I took it further. I said, okay, let me just make sure when I'm speaking in front of you all that I'm accurate. So I went to find my location to get a vaccine, and this is the CVS near my house. It says Pfizer BioNTech. This is not Comirnaty. This is not FDA approved. So in closing, if we cannot protect our troops from this medical tyranny and this forced medical procedures, then they absolutely have no reason to fight for us. They're out there risking their lives, but if they don't have bodily autonomy and their freedom, honestly, I don't blame them for leaving the military. Please pass this bill. Please stop forced vaccinations. Otherwise, the innovation, entrepreneurialism, and greatness of our country will be gone forever. Thank you. I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Sorry. Are there any further questions? Any questions? Not seeing any. Are there any other oral proponents? Not seeing any. We have a. We're running short on time. It's actually probably. Yeah. Well, we have one neutral too that needs to. We have all the written for the proponents. Let's move on to the neutral. Major Cara Beth Newhold.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. Thank you very much, and I would like to also thank the rest of the members of the legislature and the people of Kansas for your continued support of the Kansas National Guard. I'm here today to testify on the fiscal note for Senate Bill 370 on behalf of the Adjutant General's Department. While the note correctly states that the enactment of this bill would not have an immediate fiscal effect, it does not address the risk to the Kansas National Guard's future budgets. For the past 89 years, the Kansas National Guard has required membership in the National Guard of the United States. And this dual enlistment provides for the efficient utilization of our troops to serve both Kansas and our nation. Our dual membership also allows the federal government to provide over 99% of our annual budget. If passed, this legislation could signal to the Pentagon and to the Department of Defense an unwillingness to uphold our sworn federal obligation. Without a federal mission, there's little incentive for the federal government to continue funding the Kansas National Guard. And this could result in the removal of federal units, jobs, and equipment. A loss of federal funding would have a dire impact on our troops and Kansas, as the Kansas National Guard currently provides Kansas with approximately 1,700 full-time positions and another 4,800 part-time positions. It also operates approximately $4.5 billion worth of assets in our state. If the Kansas National Guard loses its federal funding, it would not be able to continue providing the robust support to our communities and the economy. For example, the Kansas National Guard fought the wildfires in western Kansas last month with the federally owned aircraft. And these aircraft are in high demand across the National Guard and could be relocated to another state if we had no federal mission. So as you can see, the loss of federal funding would critically impact not only the Kansas National Guard, but the state of Kansas and its citizens. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak this morning, and I stand by for any questions you may have.
Senator Hildebrand.
Major, thank you for your testimony. You referred to the federal obligation and the federal oath. Do you have a copy of those documents?
I do not have those with me, Senator, but I can get you a copy.
If you would provide those to
Yes, sir.
the committee, thank you.
Senator Fasco-Doe.
Major Carrie Beth, so when you said the word if, talking about losing the federal funding, so what does it depend on to help us better with this bill?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for that question. So it depends on the signal to the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. So as you know, within the military, the budget, there's always a friction point of who gets what and where units or equipment go. So if this legislation passed, that could signal to the Pentagon and Department of Defense that we are unwilling to uphold our federal obligation.
Senator Hosher, and then Longbine, that'll be it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to everybody who testified. Thank you for your service. Sergeant Howard, my brother was in Iraq at the same time as you in the Army, and Major McKnight, I think online, my dad is a Marine, and I hope you don't make your kids get up at 5 a.m. on Saturday like mine did. So anyway, I do have a question. I appreciate the efforts of this bill, especially in terms of the need to have Congress to declare war. As mentioned, though, there's no fiscal note as attached to the state, but I'm guessing that's because the DOD funds the National Guard. So to your point, if we implement statutes that differ from federal guidelines, that's what causes the problem as far as the potential loss of funding, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then if we lose the funding, then we don't have the National Guard in Kansas to help us with wildfires, those other situations.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major, thank you for your service. I don't really have a specific question from you, but as a senator who represents Fort Riley and the state of readiness that is trained for at Fort Riley, I have serious concerns about this bill. First of all, the National Guard is a key component of our state of readiness in this, not only in this state, but in this country. For us to single ourselves out is something that I believe would be very, very detrimental and send a very poor message to the Department of Defense, not only affecting our National Guard, but probably our active military bases within the state also. The vaccine mandate, I've stated publicly time and time again, I do not support vaccine mandates, but I am not the Commander-in-Chief of the military. The Commander-in-Chief of the military has decided that. That is currently being litigated in federal court, and Kansas passing a law is not going to supersede federal action in a federal court. So it's unfortunate that that mandate has come down, but this bill will do absolutely nothing for that. My biggest concern is what message are we sending to the Department of Defense about the state of readiness in Kansas, and how does this affect our military installations? And I can't see any angle that would make it any good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. With that, we'll close the hearing. We're adjourned. Thank you.